falls on a road in Oregon. A car races toward the hospital, flashing lights reflected in the windshield. At the wheel, a mother talking fast. Her story sounds clear. A stranger appeared, the road turned into a trap, and she cast herself as the heroine. But something feels off. The words are in order, yet the emotions don't follow. That gap is what unsettles us right away. In this story, everything seems in place. A simple version, reassuring, almost convenient. And yet, the closer we look, the more the vanish cracks. The silences are too polished, the gestures too rehearsed. Details shift around like furniture moved to hide a crack in the wall. And then there's this central role, the mother. Protective by nature, the final barrier, the instinctive shield. Here, the symbol trembles. When the maternal mask starts to slip, the unease becomes overwhelming. Diane Downs is not a mother like the others. She is not a woman caught by chance or fate. Not at all. Diane clings to a story she herself has crafted. A narrative where she stands at the center, where idealized love turns into obsession, and where her children become obstacles. So how can a mother turn her protective role against the very ones she brought into the world? And how will the fragile voice of her own daughter, a survivor, end up cracking open this carefully built tale? Welcome to Trigger Minds. On May 19th, 1983, around 10 p.m., the emergency entrance of Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Oregon is suddenly rushed by a car. At the wheel is Diane Downs, just 27 years old, screaming for help and calling for attention. In the back seat lie her 3 children, all gravely wounded by point-blank gunfire. Cheryl, 7, is already not breathing. Danny, only 3 years old, is limp and unresponsive. Christy, 8, struggles desperately to stay conscious. The scene is brutal, unimaginable. A mother driving through the night with her own children covered in blood. Very quickly, the medical staff notices a disturbing detail. Diane is injured too, but only slightly. Just a superficial wound to her forearm. Nothing compared to the catastrophic injuries of the children. While doctors fight frantically to save Christy and Danny, Diane is already recounting her version of events in a rapid, almost rehearsed tone. According to her, a stranger, a man with long hair, had waved her down, asking for a ride. She claims she stopped, and that this man suddenly opened fire without warning. Diane insists that she tried to resist to shield the children, then got back behind the wheel and sped toward the hospital to save them. The story seems clear, in fact too clear. Police immediately begin to note glaring inconsistencies. First, the timeline. From the alleged scene of the attack to the hospital, Diane took far longer than necessary. A witness would later testify that he saw her car moving very slowly, headlights off, even though her children inside were bleeding to death. Then there is her behavior. No visible panic, no collapse, no frantic gestures. Her words flow quickly, her narrative perfectly shaped, almost mechanical, as if she were already reciting a story carefully memorized. As the investigation moves forward, doubts only deepen. Neighbors and colleagues describe Diane as attractive, even charismatic, but unstable and obsessed with her romantic relationships. Just weeks before the shooting, she had been involved with a man who categorically refused to raise children. Several friends recall troubling confessions. She often complained that her kids kept her from living, that they were a constant obstacle to her happiness. This refrain surfaces again and again like a dark, unsettling chorus. Investigators also uncovered contradictions in her account. Sometimes she says the assailant wanted to steal her car. At other times, that he simply wanted to kill. The physical descriptions she gives are inconsistent. And above all, the weapon used, a .22 caliber, matches a revolver Diane herself owned. Gunpowder residue found on her hands only strengthens the suspicions. But the real turning point lies elsewhere. Christy, the eldest, miraculously survives after weeks in critical condition. She cannot speak yet, her voice locked away by trauma. Investigators wait patiently, convinced that this child's testimony could reveal the truth. In the meantime, they watch Diane closely. Her hospital visits strike them as chilling. She laughs, she even flirts with staff members. She tells light-hearted anecdotes. Everything, in short, except the behavior of a mother shattered by the loss of one child and the suffering of two others. In February 1984, after months of rehabilitation, Christie slowly regains her speech. When asked what happened, she hesitates, trembles, then finally speaks the words no one dared to imagine. "Mom shot us." Those three words are enough to shatter Diane's version completely. The mask falls. It is no longer the tale of a mysterious armed stranger, but the horrifying story of a mother turning her weapon on her own flesh and blood. The trial begins a few months later. Prosecutors paint the portrait of a cold woman, narcissistic, obsessed with the love of a man who wanted no children. Witnesses line up. Neighbors, colleagues, lovers, doctors, and above all, Christie, who takes the stand, her voice fragile but determined. In June 1984, the verdict is announced. Diane Downs is found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and assault.
She's been charged with 1 count of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of assault in the first degree.
The sentence is heavy and final. Life in prison plus 50 years with no chance of parole for decades. The case shocks America to its core because it breaks apart a universal symbol, maternal instinct. Because it forces everyone to confront a terrifying question. What happens when the person meant to protect becomes the threat? Behind the simple, relentless facts, a dizzying psychological fracture emerges. And that is where the real story truly begins. From the very first hours of the investigation, something feels wrong in Diane Downs' version of events. But only as the weeks pass does the gap between her words and reality grow into a chasm. Her story, repeated mechanically, starts to crumble under the weight of contradictions. And the more she talks, the deeper she digs herself. Because the real twist in this case is not only judicial, it is, above all, psychological. Diane presents herself as a heroic victim. She casts herself as the brave survivor of a senseless ambush. But behind that mask, every bit of her behavior sends the opposite signal. Where tears should flow, there are smiles. Where protective gestures are expected, there are only calculated glances. Her children lie between life and death, and she is laughing in the corridors of the hospital. This disconnect unsettles even the most seasoned investigators. For here, the absence of emotion itself becomes evidence in reverse. What she fails to show speaks louder than anything she says. The twist also lies in how her carefully staged narrative turns against her. At first it seems solid. A long-haired stranger, a stop by the roadside, gunshots out of nowhere. But the inconsistencies pile up. How to explain the time lost between the alleged scene and the hospital? Why is the weapon used an exact match to the one Diane owned? Why does her version change depending on who is listening? Each question becomes a thorn stuck deep in the story she tried so hard to impose. The breaking point comes with Christie, 8 years old, a fragile survivor, scarred in her body and in her memory. For months she cannot speak, her silence heavy with meaning. Doctors wait, investigators wait, everyone holds their breath, and when her words finally emerge, they destroy the illusion. Mom shot us. This is not just a revelation, it is an earthquake. Because the truth doesn't come from an expert or a police officer, but from a child. The weakest voice becomes the most undeniable. Psychologically, this twist is staggering. The viewer, the juror, the ordinary citizen, all find themselves face to face with an intimate fracture. The maternal figure, expected to protect, has turned into a threat. This reversal shakes the collective imagination, because if a mother can become the aggressor, what refuge remains? Diane, meanwhile, keeps clinging to her version. She smiles for the cameras. She multiplies the interviews. She tries to charm the public just as she once tried to charm her lovers. But the more she exposes herself, the more she reveals the inner void, a constant need for attention, an inability to show the expected emotions. The twist here takes the form of a reversed mirror. Every gesture she thinks she controls becomes proof of her lack of empathy. The trial itself showcases this fracture. Witnesses take the stand one after another. Doctors describe her coldness. Neighbors recall her troubling confessions. Former lovers reveal her obsessions. And then Christy, a frail silhouette walking slowly to the stand. Her voice trembles, but her words are clear. For the jury, there is no longer any doubt. The collapse of Diane's story is complete. The version of the mysterious stranger vanishes, replaced by the naked reality. A mother willing to erase her children for the sake of an impossible love. This twist is not only about an investigation collapsing into truth, it is also about a media spectacle slipping out of the hands of its lead actress. Diane Downs, convinced she controls her image, offers herself to cameras she believes she can seduce. She smiles, she jokes, she plays her role. But every move turns against her. Where she hopes to show strength, the public sees coldness. Where she tries to look lighthearted, observers detect a chilling absence of empathy. This media exposure becomes a cruel mirror. Instead of projecting the role she longs for, Diane exposes the very flaw that condemns her. And so a deeper perception shatters. The familiar landmarks blur. The boundary between protective instinct and destructive impulse collapses. And behind the verdict, one haunting question remains. What could ever push a mother to cross such a line? The case of Diane Downs goes far beyond the simple boundaries of a courtroom. To understand what really unfolded, we need to dive into the psychological mechanisms revealed through her actions and her words. Because this tragedy is not only the story of a weapon and innocent victims, it is also the portrait of a personality at war with itself, a woman bending reality until it fits perfectly with her desire. From the very beginning, what stands out in Diane is the narcissism she constantly displays. She stages herself at every moment, in front of police officers, in front of doctors, in front of the cameras. She presents herself as a heroic survivor. Even after her arrest, she keeps trying to seduce public opinion. The smiles, the jokes, the playful charm become her trademark, almost like a costume she never removes, as if the gaze of others was vital, indispensable to her very existence. But that strategy backfires. The more she shows herself, the more she reveals her lack of empathy. The tragedy of her children never seems to take first place. Beneath this facade lies an unbearable inattention. Diane wants to be both mother and free lover. Her children stand as a constant barrier to the idealized love she is chasing. This tearing conflict she resolves through a mental construction. Eliminate the obstacle so that the love story can survive. It is cognitive dissonance at work. Her mind refuses to live with the contradiction between her desires and her reality, so she invents a logic that justifies the unjustifiable. In her inner narrative, what she does for love becomes an acceptable equation. The rationalization is dizzying, a personal mechanism powerful enough to crush universal morality. This dynamic reaches its peak when the role of mother turns back against itself. The maternal figure, meant to be the ultimate refuge, collapses. Diane doesn't just betray this role, she inverts it. She does not protect her children, she becomes their threat. In the collective imagination, this is an earthquake. The most sacred symbol, maternal love, fractures. Such a transgression shocks far beyond the courtroom, because it shakes a deeply rooted certainty that a mother, by essence, cannot harm her child. Then comes Diane's strange and disturbing coldness. Where pain should explode, there is nothing. Where guilt should overwhelm, she laughs. This absence of affect does not only mean a lack of emotion, but a radical disconnection from others. The children, the relatives, even the public, all become secondary props in a performance that serves only her. This emotional void illustrates the chilling mechanics of someone who lives entirely through her own reflection, unable to connect to any external reality. And behind it all lies the obsessive fantasy of love. Diane was not simply trying to seduce a man. She idealized this relationship to the point of sacrificing everything else. Her lover did not want children? Then she erased the inconvenient variable. In her intimate logic, the dreamed love justified the unthinkable. She transformed this desire into a higher cause, as if nothing else had weighed against it. At that moment, her inner story flipped. Her children stopped being lives to protect and became obstacles to remove. This obsession reveals a destructive engine, when absolute desire becomes stronger than life itself, and when it disguises itself in the deceptive clothes of necessity. The case of Diane Downs therefore brings to light a whole network of psychological flaws, a devouring narcissism, a delirious rationalization, an inversion of the maternal role, a chilling coldness, a destructive obsession with love. But this analysis also reveals something more universal, because ultimately, what fascinates and disturbs is not just her crime. It is the collapse of our most intimate certainties. If a mother can become an executioner, then no certainty is absolute. The protective line can break. And it is precisely this vertigo that continues to haunt the story even 40 years later. Diane Downs is serving her sentence behind prison walls. Her daughter Cheryl died that night. Danny and Christy, they survived, but carry forever the scars, both physical and psychological, of that May 1983 tragedy. Yet what remains is not just a closed case. It is a fracture that still resonates, an echo disturbing even 40 years later. Because this story is not only about bullets fired in the dark, it is about an intimate reversal. A mother who, instead of protecting, becomes the threat. And this shift does not belong only to the courts. It questions each of us. How far can desire go when it erases everything else? What happens to morality when obsession takes control? And above all, what is left of innocence when the very figure meant to protect it turns against it? By revisiting this drama, we confront the vertigo of the human mind. Its ability to lie to itself, to reshape reality until it feels bearable, to justify the unjustifiable. That is the disturbing fault line at the heart of this story, the universal crack that makes the Diane Downs case more than a crime story. Because behind it emerges another, darker question. How many other tales, still hidden, rest on the same invisible fractures? And how many lives collapse when love, faith, or loyalty transform into weapons? The case of Diane Downs was not just a news item. It was, and remains, a descent into the labyrinth of the human mind. This is the DNA of Trigger Minds. See you soon for another case.